I want to start off with one anecdote about Marcelo. When I joined Google, he and Aaron Kemp, you remember Aaron Kemp, were the only two Android developers, and they put together the Google Plus app on Android all by themselves within like 3 to 6 weeks or something like that. And I go, wow, that can't be done. Well, it happened. So I don't know what they feed him in Brazil or whatever, but he's an amazing engineer. I do want to start with kind of the word. I don't even know how to pronounce it, stalwart. I had to look it up when Chris suggested it. But it means the three things: reliable, and I have to look it up too again. So loyal, steady, and completely reliable. So just keep that in mind in the context of when we're talking, because a lot of the stuff hopefully resonates when it comes to kind of those two pillars. And hopefully the questions that we have that come from Marcelo and I also reflect maybe some of your concerns. So let's make it also collaborative. If you have things, just raise your hands and we'll try to make it work. So you want to add anything else before we go?
Yes.
Okay.
It took a little bit longer than that. Well, just to give you guys some context, and I don't have to repeat on every question that I ask, we'll be really focused on Series A startups, small teams, not yet scaling up. So I think most of the conversation will be based on that. And I guess hopefully everything you answer is in that context.
More numbers. It's like less than 20 developers, like in Series A land, $20 million type. So money is not an issue, but still tight, and you still need to make decisions, right? And well, that's kind of the context and scope.
So yeah, now starting with real important topics. I would love to hear your thoughts on at that stage of startups on technical leadership versus product leadership.
Yeah, in the spirit of like efficiency and focus, the driver in my view to solve problems is to be like really focused and get the expertise that you need, and that expertise has to be across the board with everybody. And since most of the mechanics of a startup is technically driven, you need to be extremely knowledgeable behind the area that you're working in. So I would strongly suggest that you look at bringing on board subject matter experts. I'm going to avoid using in this context kind of the product leadership name, so that you get the idea of having the SMEs work together, convey the domain expertise, and start solving specific problems. Because otherwise, if you bring some people on board that just don't have that, it becomes very unwieldy. So at Ross right now, we're hiring lawyers. We don't have product managers at this point. These are aspirational individuals that love technology but have a law degree, and so we bring them on board so they can help us with our context.
So on large companies like Google, for example, there is this model of 70-20-10, where 70% of the time should be spent on product development, 20% on infrastructure, and 10% on experimentation. How do you think that applies to startups?
I flip it completely on its head. One of the big pillars in this domain, in this context, is disruption. And you must be disruptive in order to succeed, so that the numbers would look more like 40-20-40, or maybe even 20-20-60. I would urge early on to be on kind of the 60% disruptive model, figure out polishing at the 20% your product when the right time comes, and then look at the simplicity, hopefully the simplicity of your stack to give you a lot less worry about what thing you need to clean up from an infrastructure perspective. So think big. Don't be afraid of going big. We'll talk about that later as well in some other context. Because you're out there to disrupt the industry. You're not there to, like what Paige at Google said, do the toothbrush test. If you do the toothbrush test, it means you're working on the wrong shit. You gotta not, brush your teeth. You gotta go big and disrupt the industry. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it applies a lot to how we have built FAIR so far. Things that we focus a lot, and especially me as CTO, we focus a lot on shipping things very fast. Our teams, we deploy our backend and our front end code multiple times a day, and with that, what we do for organizing our all the features we want is we always focus on shipping user value, but cutting scope as much as we can to ship things fast, and then learn from it as much as we can. And a lot of the features that we launch at this stage are based on intuition, but by launching it fast, we get a lot of data back, and we know if the intuition was right, we should keep enhancing this feature, or many times we are wrong, the intuition is wrong, we shut it down very quickly, and we waste very little time on it.
I think also if you take a look at the time frame that you're driving towards, don't think that because you're thinking big that you need 12, 18 months worth of timeline. You can actually get, with focused developers, kind of in that range of 5 to 10, a lot of stuff done in a quarter's time. So execution is important, and delivering stuff into prod as fast as possible is what's going to make it happen.
Changing gears a little bit, how do you focus on management at this early stage, and mentorship as well?
Yeah, I try not to think about, at this context, about evaluating everybody from a performance perspective. You hear people talk about leveling up and getting at the end of a quarter or 6 months a rating. To me, the two things that really drive at this level growth is mentorship. We'll talk a little bit about that, and peer-to-peer evaluation. So call it 360s, call it code reviews that you do, and building out kind of those relationships is what I feel trumps management in the pure sense. And build out a solid mentorship structure that allows you to grow people effectively.
And yeah, on top of that, you were telling me earlier about the 25, 50, 25 model, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that again.
Yeah, so in the previous company I was at, Shopify, JML had this 25, 50, 25 model, which I've started since I've learned on how to apply it. Basically, 25% of the time I'm learning from you, 50% of the time you're teaching everybody else, and the other 25% you're learning from me. And so you always need to have that breakdown and context to and structure, so you're able to compartmentalize when you're mentoring someone, how they're able to teach you stuff, how they're able to teach others, and then as well how I can influence their careers. So it works in kind of that model extremely well. I've only been able to apply it over the past couple of years, so it's not that you're going to take your entire organization and say, okay, we're all going to sit and do this right now. So you use that kind of golden rule, 80-20. Take the 20% of your folks that have that potential and apply that model, and have an actual plan quarter over quarter that you do these three things all the time. And you'll see magic on the other end when it comes to building trust and getting things out the door.
That's great.
What do you think about that?
it was the first time I heard about it, but it sounds like a great model to follow. Like I definitely want to learn more about how you guys did this.
Yeah, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to kind of talk this through if anyone's interested in setting it up.
Cool. So another thing that is very interesting for me is startups, right? You start and you have an idea and you're building it, and again, eventually you get to this stage of Series A and you have a team and things are working. You have some product market fit. It's a lot about product, right? Building the product. When and how does it change to the team?
From my perspective. I've been luckily part of a few startups at the early stage, and even some of the initiatives at Google, a little less at Shopify. But it starts when you're right there trying to build that first experience. Investors actually want to understand that the people they have actually are the good quality, understand the market, and can actually take them to the next level. It's a lot less about the product in the early phases. Once you got market fit and you're in kind of that range of 15 or so developers, then you can start thinking about the product and how you pivot in the industry in different areas to capture more of the market. But in kind of the current phase where Ross is right now, it's all about the people. And I strongly suggest when you get to this point in your careers or you're in this journey, you really think hard about who you have with you and who you have around you, because they will like make or break your big idea. So making changes are difficult. You should feel comfortable making them. And bring people together that just understand what the problems are and how they help you fix them.
Yeah, so and related to that, like one of the biggest challenges we have as a company right now is scaling up. Like as Nabil was saying, we got to a very large business in a very short time, in less than 2 years, and our team was very small at some point. Well, we got to 30 and 50 people, and we were very efficient, very effective with that team. We managed to take a lot of shortcuts as well because everybody connected so well together. But then we start to go from 50 to 100 and over 100, and it starts to become a challenge to organize people and like move. My biggest challenge, and I would love to hear your ideas on here, is like, how do you get this team that you have that's very efficient of 30 people and you try to replicate it to scale up the company?
Yeah, I use, as you can tell, I'm very numbers driven. I don't know, maybe it's my math background, but I use kind of this 1 to 3 model. So if you put in place your mentorship structure, like I said, don't try to boil the ocean. Pick those 3 people that you can actually mentor. Once you get them to that next level and you get them to like leadership qualities after like 6 or 9 months, then you start hiring the next set of individuals where you can kind of build out your teams. I also feel it's important that you put in place some replications of process. And one thing that's worked for me is being able to move people in teams once they finish something onto something completely new. Having them run with the same area for a prolonged period of time introduces probably other things, but at the scale that we're talking about, especially if you want to slowly grow, you need to be able to give individuals the ability to learn other parts of the system and drive success in other areas. And the other area that I feel is important is to stop worrying about titles, because as you grow, everyone starts thinking about who I am and what I do, and it's all about roles and responsibilities that kind of translate into impact. So maybe in the first team mandate they do machine learning work. Maybe in the second iteration, they build out, our servers and APIs for external consumption. So I would kind of use those three pillars, like 1-to-3 ratio to kind of grow leadership. Don't worry about titles and drive like roles and responsibilities. And third, rotate people across different areas so that they can learn the system better. And I think at the end, when you piece these things, it really helps you with your mentorship structure and building out that model we talked about.
Yeah. Also related to that, we have this I have this idea that when you start a company, the most important thing is that you hire generalists, like people that can wear multiple hats. You go work for Google as an engineer, everything is set up for you. You're given a description of what you need to build, and you're very free to use whatever engineering you want to build that exact UI, for example. But in a startup, you have to go get your own servers, you have to figure a lot of things out, you wear multiple hats, right? When it's starting. And then there is a transition as well, where as it starts to grow, you start to transition from needing only generalists to starting to need more specialists, people that will get and wear one single hat but do that job very well and in depth. What are your thoughts on that, and also on how do you migrate from convincing people to what we talk a lot at Fair about is giving out your Legos, right? Distributing the things that you own to other people.
Yeah, you need. I think that's a time in your journey where I've seen it happen when you're around 5 to 10 developers. That's kind of where you usually hire generalists to help you get your market fit. It's there where you probably have maybe 2, maybe 3 really good engineers that you can leverage, and that's when you start applying kind of those other models. At the end of the day, you don't want those 3 individuals to be kind of the time, every time a question comes up, that those 3 must answer the questions all the time. And so some techniques that I've used in the past that work is give a mandate to these teams. These teams make them self-sufficient and autonomous, and feel good if they fail, and if they fail fast. Those are really good signals of growth and learning. If you're able to build that trust with the teams in that context, it really helps. At Ross, for example, right now, I don't remember what you called your little teams when you... Pods. We call them flights at Ross. We use the airplane metaphor too, and so these flights are built and they rotate every quarter to address different parts of the system, and they're self-sufficient. They have their own key objectives. They align to the company goals, and what we try to do is put what we call a stakeholder in there to help them in the case that they have a problem or an issue they want to fix, and we stay out of their execution path. At the end of the day, they might deliver everything that we agreed upon, but that's not the goal. The goal is to build that trust that the team can execute autonomously and be able to replicate that in the next quarter and the next quarter. So
based on the way you described this, assume that you guys use OKRs and you have big companies' objectives, and that's how you organize the teams as well?
Yeah, some places do it, some places don't. I think for the sake of trying something, we've started with OKRs, and we only have right now quarter-to-quarter outlooks. We don't think further than that. When planning the next quarter comes out, it might not mean it's a continuation of the previous one, because we've learned things that we need to address, and so it might be completely different pivots in the next quarter. So we try to keep it in that time frame.
Yeah, I asked because that's how we have been organizing the company. I guess, like coming from Square, that was a big thing of how things run there. So we started the company, we were 4 people and we had OKRs. Yeah. And we have always, now that we're scaling up, we are still organized by OKRs, and we have these pods that are completely self-sufficient. They have a product manager, a tech lead, they have back-end engineers, front-end, data science, and they're really responsible for one objective in the company.
Yeah, I think in scaling it down, you might need to have like multiple people play roles in each one of these flights or pods. But like you said, you have an SME, you have someone who does UX, data for sure, and then the engineers that are required.
So changing gears a little more, what are your thoughts on balancing out product speed with quality?
I'm in favor at this level for velocity. It's kind of the alpha and omega for kind of delivering impact and visually showing your customers what you're all about and what you can do. In kind of that model that we talked about, the 70-20-10, that kind of gets flipped on its head. You will always find the time to polish things, right? And even when you decide what to polish, you should think real carefully if that is more valuable than like going out for another big idea. I would err to go out for the next big idea than think of like polishing things and delivering them kind of like in a perfect model. When things are done, we like to get things out quickly, hopefully every day, and not feel bad about it. Your users will get accustomed to it, and they'll be actually surprised and happy when they get new functionality that can use and leverage. I feel as we can talk about scale as well. When you get kind of to those higher echelons of adoption, you need to be careful about reading the signals of stability in production, and those are the ones that hopefully you can see early on and plan on how to address and fix. So if anything, I would use that as your criteria of what to fix on the quality side, but in the scope of a startup, I would err strongly on velocity.
So I would love to learn more details about, like, with that in mind. Yes, you want velocity, but like, what does that mean? Do you have code reviews, or do you completely ignore that? When do you start doing those? Same with unit tests. Do you have tests in your code when you're a small startup? When do you stop, or when do you start doing that if you don't?
Yeah, we had a good discussion in the fishbowl behind here, and we agreed with Marcelo that code reviews are imperative, and as I mentioned earlier, what you should be doing is doing code reviews by distributing it to many people, not picking out the one individual you like or that you think they know, but you want to be able to give the opportunity to get feedback on your code from other peers, so they get to learn those systems and are able to contribute in the future. So keeping that healthy rotation is really important. And then automating with unit tests as much as possible. Feel free to do test-driven development if that's how you would like to start. I think is really important. I think Shopify had one of the best kind of dev acceleration systems in place, all the way from coding to production, and driving that pattern of work where you distribute code reviews to your peers and make sure you do unit testing and coverage and automate that is kind of a really important part of a developer's day. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Earlier you alluded to like some signals of things where you might want to check quality. Can you give some specifics of it? What are the metrics or the things you're looking at
Yeah.
things that perhaps we could go home and look at tonight?
The three things that are top of mind for me is system uptime. It's like really easy right now these days to monitor that. The second one is performance. You should have a North Star of what that looks like for everybody. Obviously today everyone expects like tens of milliseconds of response time, but you need to settle on kind of what that is. And on the first one, everyone talks about 5 nines, 3 nines, whatever is something that you're comfortable with at any point in time in your journey. I think it needs to be defined. And then the third item that we pay close attention to is user feedback. It can come in from different perspectives. You might have an app and you get feedback or get ratings. On mobile, you might have like user tests that you do that drive experiences and you get feedback from there. So those would be kind of my three signals that I would drive like impact. The other thing I think we mentioned with Marcelo, something that's really important is you do root cause analysis on deployments. In this fast pace, maybe you want to elaborate how you think about this.
For sure. Well, just also answering your question, like for us, a lot of it, the signals, in the very early days was all feeling, right? You start to feel like, okay, there has been too many bugs, or we sit close to customer support and we hear a lot of complaints or more than usual. And you start to feel like, okay, maybe we're moving too fast and quality is dropping. But like at some point you have to start being very data driven on those things. Today we look at a lot of like signals like from customer NPS. Like if NPS is dropping, something is wrong. And if we didn't change the product or the value propositions of the product, most likely it's quality that's dropping. From, of course, all the metrics that we have on like support tickets and growth on support tickets. For us, we are a marketplace, so we have that on both sides of the marketplace, and it's like multiple products. Two, also like monitoring at the your bug tracking system, like number of bugs that are being generated and fixed and things like that. And then we get into what we're talking about with like how important I think it is to have postmortems for everything that goes wrong in a company from the very early moments. And the main reason that, and the way we do it is always like, whatever happened, it might be our website was down for 5 minutes, or there was a bug in production for a couple of hours or maybe a couple of days. It's not for blaming, but it's always very important to do a full report on it, and we are very serious about measuring and taking note of when did that start, why did that start, how long was it in production, how many people did it affect, and using some of this data, we can put these issues in buckets of the severity of it. But the most important thing that always comes out of our postmortems is how do we prevent this from ever happening again? And we always have action items there which will put some protections in place that this won't happen again, and we'll learn from it, and hopefully the next one is going to be less severe.
I have a very strong opinion about bugs. If it's possible not to worry about bugs at all, don't do it. If someone screams loud enough, you'll hear it, and you'll need to go and fix it. Miring yourself in kind of the thousands of bugs or hundreds of bugs and triaging them in P3s and P2s, in my view, is a complete waste of time. Try to improve your process of code reviewing, unit tests, do your RCAs when things in production go wrong, and monitor the signals, NPS, user satisfaction, your system's uptime and your performance in terms of the experiences with your users, and just focus on P0 items. That's it. I would not put yourself in a scenario where you're reviewing bugs every day, all the time. Yeah, you have a question?
What is the stack of your companies like, and why did you guys choose it?
I'll start. We're a really simple solution. We're in AWS right now for legacy reasons, and we're spilling over into Google land. But at some point in time, we'll decide one or the other over the next little while. We are an S3 system that's 100% almost Python driven because of the domain we're in. We have React on the front end, and we use Elasticsearch. That was another question further down, is try to keep your stacks really simple. In choosing mobile, if we'll probably go React Native as a simple extension. So that's kind of what our runtime looks like right now.
Yeah, I'm just answering the same question. For our stack, we have a Java and Kotlin backend. The reason why we chose Java to start is because that's where we had the most experience and we knew how to build apps there. We had a very good framework for building Java applications. And the reason why we're migrating to Kotlin now is mostly because I believe that the language is a language that Google is going to be betting on, and it's a modern version of Java that's completely interoperable with it. I think it's going to be very big in the future. With that, so our servers today, we didn't start on AWS. We started on Heroku, which is a much better and simpler place to start. We didn't have to worry about infrastructure at all until we had to worry about infrastructure, and then we moved into AWS with Kubernetes. And we have a MySQL database, but we also use things like Redis, a lot of things from AWS, like Kinesis, Firehose, and the main thing, which is related to the next question I'm going to ask Stergios, is we have a giant Redshift database where every data from every part of our company ends up there, and it's used for both data science and analytics. And on the front end, we have a React app. I think the reason why I chose React when we started this, because it's the very first web framework that I looked at, and I felt like not only it makes sense, but if you ask 4 different front-end engineers to build something in React, they're going to look very similar. The model is very opinionated. Yeah. So
I just wanted to also, we're on Kubernetes as well. I live and die by that stuff, and so it's an amazing infrastructure to have as part of your deployment process. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. Just going back to the previous topic on velocity versus quality, right? Do you look at that differently depending upon the space that you're operating in, whether you are acting in a B2C space or a B2B space? Because when you are going in a B2B space, obviously when you're a little beyond the product market fit, you may not have a marketing dollar infused into the engine, right? So you have handhold of customer you're playing with, right? So there is always the factor of safety boundary layer that you have to play with. Just your...
Yeah, so the question was if the velocity versus quality dilemma applies to B2B, B2C, A to B, X to Y, all that stuff. I think you, personally, I think you need to just keep it extremely simple, right? The more you throw into your day-to-day work, all these pivots and oh, they're doing a demo today, don't touch the production system. Oh, I need to spin off a demo system so that we don't, change enterprise customer experiences. I've been in some of these spaces a few times, banking as well as semiconductor and now legal. It takes a little bit of time to get people used to it, but we just released something big today, and of course someone came into work and they just didn't read our release notes or wasn't prepped with it, and we got an NPS score of 10 because they were surprised of what functionality we gave them. So you need to build that trust and cadence, and I think people will be extremely happy with where you're going. Just remember how hard it was to get these things going, and now everyone looks at like when's the next Apple update, and just give it to me tomorrow, and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't worry about it at all.
So I have very strong opinions there as well, because having worked with Stergios on Google Plus, which like in 2 weeks we had 10 million users, and then building Square Cash, which again today they have like 30 million monthly active users or something like that. What matters the most in those B2C environments or social networks is like the number of people affected, right? A bug in an app like Google Plus or Square Cash that affects 2,000 users, 5,000 users, doesn't matter as much. We're gonna be like, oh, it's only 2,000 people, right? But once we move into like our business today affair, where our customers is like a store, that the LTV for us is very high, a bug that affects 5 people is a big deal, right? So it's just a very different perspective, and it's also like, it does change how you look at quality. You have to be way more mindful of little things, and that's where like we get into like on call, and like when should you be on call, and how often when do you start having people on call?
I think that does bring up a good question. We can have a good conversation we can have offline in the context of being in this, finding market fit, and you're like less than 20 Series A. Speed is important. Transitioning then into a CAC LTV model and building out more momentum and impact. I think I would think you would be fixing your processes early on so that you can continue that momentum without needing to deviate. So, yep.
A little while earlier, we were talking about, you mentioned you wanted to make the flights in your company to be like pretty self-sufficient and giving them all the tools to succeed. I was just wondering, of course, super early on in the company, you might give them a quarter to go execute by themselves and not bother them, but what they're going to be building really early on is probably coming from yourself or the leadership team. At what scale does that start to change in your opinion, or does it make sense to start changing that? And it's like, okay, well, you teams have been self-sufficient, now it's also like you also get the power to decide what to build next versus that coming from the leadership team.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the question is like, when do you start giving that self-sufficient product allowance to these small teams to do what they think is right versus it coming top down? So early on, I think it's important to give everybody a clear understanding of what your North Star is. And once you do that and you repeat it in your town halls and you throw it into your .com and you put it part of your slogan and taglines, people will start getting the message of what your main focus is and where you're heading towards. I think if you've hired smart people that like to do problem solving in that space, you probably need maybe 2 quarters worth of teaching on how to think in that space, and then allow them to become more self-sufficient. You need to calibrate it again when you hire more and you scale your team. But if you have the stability of a couple of quarters of the same teams and people, you should be able to get to the bottom-up side of things. And then evaluate what the team is delivering as kind of like a sounding board thereafter. So at Ross, we're not there yet. We probably need another quarter or so to get into that mode. And it might differ from places to places, but hiring the right people that understand that perspective is crucial. And being able to get to that end game is really important, because What that allows you to do after is think even bigger after that. You've got the time to think bigger from there.
Early on with startups, a lot of times you're talking about moving fast. It usually makes sense for a lot of things to use the cheapest, fastest solution to get something done. So if a customer wants some particular report, maybe you email a developer, get them to just run a SQL query and send it back. But then over time, it can become, emailing the developer becomes the interface for getting this report. And for one thing like that, it's very clear to just build something that does that specific thing. But if you've got one manual process over here, another manual process over there, another thing with tape and glue over here, how do you handle that situation where you get to a point where you're scaling to the point where the quick and dirty isn't working anymore? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So my favorite answer to that question is no. So the question is like, how do you fulfill kind of incidental asks from the field, from customers, users, and like most of the people that deliver those answers are usually the developers in a small startup. Like if you're starting early on and you have a few customers, I think you'll work out the model. But when you're getting into kind of Series A territory and you're getting market fit, and you're building out a focus area and a North Star, I think it's important to not disrupt the team with these incidental asks. If things start becoming real critical, then sure, you can start making the request to fulfill that need. So I would err on saying no until like there's time to actually fulfill that feature. And if you really need to, what would be best to do is find people that actually can find their way through the system to answer that question that maybe are not developers, right? So the jewel of your organization are your engineers that are driving product out the door at that time in your journey. So the less time you take from them to push code out, the better it is. And if you need someone to be able to help out, make sure you hire someone, for example, that's in customer support, that's like tech savvy, is able to kind of find their way through the system, ask one or two questions, and then be able to fulfill the request. And kind of that translates, in my view, a little bit about what Marcelo said earlier, is that you have to have people that wear more than one hat in the organization. So it's been times, for example, at Ross, we want to find out why this user gave us an NPS score of 2. And if I want to find out, I don't need to go and ask anyone. I know how to make the query to actually get that data out of the system. And maybe I post this in a Slack channel so the next person can use it too. I don't know if that gives you a little bit of the model that I'm thinking.
A little bit.
I have some opinions there too that I would love to hear your thoughts on my opinions there.
Okay.
And this like goes back to like we hear this a lot, but like at startups you should do things that don't scale first, right? Yeah. So like you might claim that we shouldn't allow those things to happen, but like when the CEO goes there and tells the developer like you gotta get this thing done, they'll get it done. So for me, one of the most important skills at the startup, at the leadership at the startup is prioritizing, like deciding what's the most important thing to do next and when to do it. Everything feels like a priority. You start, you don't have anything, you have to build your product, you have to figure out product market fit, you have a million things to implement. If you talk to 5 customers, you're gonna hear a lot of things that will feel like they're urgent, but you have another million customers there that might have a different opinion, right? So picking the right things is what makes companies succeed out of everything that's a priority. And you have to do a lot of things that don't scale. But then there is, I think, which might be related to what you asked, which is when do you automate that, right? You can't just keep doing things that don't scale. But I would say, like, yes, eventually you're going to have to do one thing that is a manual process and it takes a lot of time, and you're going to use one of your precious engineers to do it, and you're going to do it twice. And once he starts doing this 3 times a week, you're going to be like, okay, it's time to build something around it, or something is broken here, right? So it's a very hard thing to answer, but prioritizing doing the right thing at the right time is one of the hardest things to do.
Gabriel?
So, since you're talking about priorities, you both talked about OKRs, which is not surprising since you both come from Google. I'd be super curious to know what kind of OKRs you use right now, if you guys can give us some examples of what you use in your companies, and how well you can actually stick to those OKRs, and when have you changed, or why did you decide to actually cancel an OKR mid-cycle?
The question was, since we come from Google, we've used OKRs. What is the structure of the OKR, and when did you start potentially changing an OKR? I'll give you a flavor of kind of what we're working on right now. So we have a North Star that's called like how many searches a user does successfully a day with a system. That means we need to define what a session is, and so we're able to capture every day when they're logged in how many successful searches they've done. And so we want to increase that 200% from beginning of the quarter in Q1 to Q2 to the end of Q2. Another one is something that to do with ARR and MRR, or CAC versus LTV, or cost of acquisition type of measurements. Those are very specific, and they're available in a very measurable way to the entire organization. When you put these in place and you peel the onion and come up with your goals, I've learned you got to stick with them for the remainder of the quarter. And the reason why you stick with them is because you've learned from your previous data gathering and quarters that those are the next most important things to do. And until you put them in place and start measuring how effective you are, you can't start eliminating them for something else. The one oddity out of kind of maybe putting something else in is if a higher priority in the organization comes. It doesn't mean that you're taking one of the KRs and not doing them now. It's just that you're deprioritizing it in favor of something that surfaced that's really critical. So I try to stick away from changing OKRs midstream unless something really urgent and critical. And again, the assumption is that you've done your homework with all the data that you've gathered beforehand to build out that good plan for the next quarter. I don't know how you think.
I'll just tell you guys a little bit about our history of OKRs. It's not just from Google, but also we got a lot of it from Square. We really use those OKRs at Square to drive everything. So we started the company, we were 4 people, and we had OKRs. Our OKRs were 2 months long. So it's this is what we want to accomplish in the next 2 months. And they were very focused and 2, 3, sometimes 4 things that were the biggest goals, always having some North Stars that were driving that. And we were fortunate enough to have a very strong board of directors even when we started the company. So the way we run the company for the first 2 years was with bi-monthly OKRs. So we would set those goals. We would work like madmen towards changing those numbers. 2 months later, we would 6 weeks in, we would have shipped a lot of stuff, and for the last 2 weeks, we would be gathering results. We would go back to our board, show them what we did, and we would already have an idea of what we wanted to do next. We would talk about it at the board meeting, get very clear direction as to what's the next important things for us to figure out. We would go back, make those OKRs for the next 2 months, and we did that for 2 years, and that's how we got to move so fast as well. It was very guided. And then this year, this is our 3rd year since January, so this year is the first time we started to do quarterly OKRs, so we extended them off because things started to get a little bit harder. And now, like since 2 quarters ago, we started to do OKRs not only for the whole company, right? Not only on the goals, the global goals of the business, but also ever smaller team like engineering and sales, and everybody else also has their own OKRs, and that's how we have been doing it. And to give you some examples of our OKRs, this quarter we have figured out that we have amazing product market fit. Our customers love what we're doing on both sides of our marketplace. So we have one OKR on making it even better for makers on our platform. We want them to like have no reason to ever leave it. So a lot of the features we're building towards that OKR are like getting makers faster and keeping them in. And we have the same OKR on the retail, on the other side of the marketplace, on retailer. And then we have an OKR on employee. Like we want to build a world-class team, and we have OKRs around what does it take for us, what are we missing to make that happen.
How much more time do we have? 5, 10 minutes? Maybe a few more questions? Any other questions from the audience?
You spoke about getting a few people and getting them up to like leadership quality. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, what are the attributes that you look for in a good leader?
So the question is, what are the attributes for a good leader? Again, I'll talk about it in the context of kind of that Series A. Like you've got like 10 to 20 developers. I'm looking at someone that can actually think big, understand what our North Star is, and find out how to actually get there is really important. Number 2, understand how to actually get shit done fast. Not necessarily always cutting quarters, but picking simple things, being aware of a lot of options that are out there, buying versus building type of mentality. And the third thing is mentorship, and how to be able to communicate what a good technical design is, what are kind of the pivots someone needs to make to be more effective in writing code. And those to me like are the fundamentals that drive kind of my thinking. Any other question? Yep.
You do one-on-ones with your team weekly. If you do, how do you structure them? What do you talk about?
Yeah. So the question is, do I do or Marcelo does one-on-one? How often and how they're structured? Depending on the size of the team, you want to keep in touch as frequently as possible, but not litter someone's calendar with meetings. Everyone just doesn't like that stuff. So I try, right now I meet everyone once every 3 weeks for a half an hour. The structure is pretty focused on your growth. It has nothing to do with what you're doing today or what you delivered kind of yesterday. And so I've in a very informal way, the material that we looked at is kind of categorized in 3. What are the big items that you're working on? 2, what are these code health infrastructure items that you're passionate about that you want to fix? And then what are your personal aspirations, right? So are you going to meetups? Do you have a mentor outside of work? Have you participated in conferences? Have you written a blog? Those things that are really important about building your personal identity in our space. And so that's kind of what we look at and get an assessment of where things are at. I don't know if that helps you a bit.
Yeah, I have. I have always done one-on-ones with everybody on my team, but recently, like last month, I had like 35 people reporting to me. So I started to like move it from weekly to bi-weekly to 3 weeks to monthly, and now of course I hired the head of engineering and We are transitioning a lot of the management, but I find them very useful and important. And I think the way I try to structure them is like I use them to get feedback on the company and on myself, of course. A little bit of it for that. Most of it is like feedback on what can we do better, what are we doing well, and what's the person doing well, and what do they want for the future. Like it's like it's good to get in and out with action items, so you know action items from your previous one, and like see what happened and where you are at, and then come up with new action items for the future as well. And you get to learn a lot about where people want to be, and you can help guide that.
Mary.
What's the work-life balance like on your teams, and do you do anything to prevent burnout when you're doing stuff?
So the question is, what's the work-life balance on our teams, and how do you prevent burnout? Right now, it's kind of hard for me to answer that question in its current context, but how would I visualize it? I think it's important that developers work on things that they're passionate about, and so you need to make sure that you find that for them, or help find that for them. So that's kind of really important. Number two, I also think it's critical that if a developer has an opinion about a stack option or some infrastructure changes, that we allow them to express those opinions, come up with options, and figure out where they go. I think that's kind of like my mental view on the work side of the fence. I think on the more like, you know, life at where you're at, it really depends on your culture. And so spending time defining what that is important. So, you know, things like working hours make a difference. You know, vacation time is important. Being able to have outings with your team. Not that everyone's going to be your pal all the time, everywhere you go, but having an established culture in the organization, I think is really, really critical. And sometimes when, you know, someone comes to the table and says, you know, we weren't able to get this thing done today, hopefully everything that we talked about, it doesn't come as a surprise. And so you give that extra time for people to get what they need done properly, versus saying, oh, you got to work on the weekend, or you got to spend your day here to get it done. So I think being able to see eye to eye on status and having like a level setting there is important.
Yeah, I agree. So for us, again, we're a little bit over 2 years now. The first year was insane. Like, there was no such thing as life. There was only the work. We started at 7 a.m. and we finished, we couldn't do anything anymore. And we did that 7 days per week for the first 7 months. Then we cut off Sundays. So we kept doing that until the end of the year, 6 days a week. The second year, we cut off Saturdays. So, and then we started at 8 a.m. as well. So like, start to improve. And I think after 6 months, we got into like a much more well-balanced work-life situation. Where we are today is like, we have built like a company that, like, we see a very long-term future for the company. We have a huge market, and we are not rushing against anything. It's our passion, really. Like, we're rushing against shipping more things faster. And like, I think today our team works, like, most people are in the office between 9 and 10 a.m. and very few people are in the office after 6 p.m. So I think we as a company understand that we are in this for the long run, and there's nothing like that's going to help by working way harder. But that being said, people are still very passionate, and some people will go home and do more work. I do a lot of that. But it's not like a mandatory thing or anything. It's people do it because they want to do it. We have to tell them to stop sometimes.
Time for one last question.
Just just on that note, like, do you feel that it's necessary to like sprint like that in the very early days, like working around the clock, or do you think that like sustainable is an option when you're just getting started?
I think you can work in sprints in that mode. I haven't been involved in like 7 days a week for like a year, but you know, doing it for like a couple of months to get a big ticket item out, absolutely. To Marcelo's point, we've also at Ross just hit that pivot where, you know, we've relooked at our working hours again and get an understanding that at some point we will have to kind of bid the you know, burn the midnight oil type of thing. But it really also depends on the people that you hire, right, and how aligned they are with how you want to run things. But I've been part of kind of, we have like a big ticket item to go out. It might take a couple of months, and you know, we'll recalibrate from there. So yeah, so it is normal to kind of see that in this ecosystem.
I think one thing that triggered us to start like that was that we joined Y Combinator, and we had nothing. We joined, we told them an idea, and they accepted us based on our history. And there were a lot of companies there that were doing things for a year or 2 or 3, and they joined to really scale up. And we started to look at it and be like, okay, 3 months from now we have to do demo day, and we have to present in front of 2,000 investors, and we have to show something. so we during those 3 months we worked like that, and I mean, we got to the end. We raised money before we finished Y Combinator, and we saw the momentum, and we had so much to build that we couldn't stop. We just wanted to see it out, and at the same time, like, I think we all had this mentality that we do not want to be building a company that, like, in 5 years from now we're gonna be like swimming against the flow and we don't know where we are. We want to like either make something that's going to be very big or fail fast. So it made a lot of sense for us to do that in the early days until we got to like Series A and then Series B, and eventually.
Y Combinator feels like a really rare opportunity, and you have like light at the end of the tunnel. You know it's going to be a few months, and that's you can
I put a lot of thought into like the gifts because I really wanted to make sure that you know it resonated.
Can you cut the live stream so I can
make fun of the make fun of me at will on live stream? I don't care. But no, seriously. So I know that you guys both love football, and you know.
You mean soccer?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. And I know both of you love food, so. There's some special edition bottles of Toronto FC kind of limited edition red wine in here.
Oh, wow.
It's the 2017 edition, the year that they won the MLS. It's actually produced in California, which is so fitting for Terminal. And then I got you one also, the same bottle, but then also one from Spain, and I got you one from Greece. Oh. In these brown bags, there's a plethora of cheeses also from Spain and Greece. And of course, you know, your tagline at your company is "The future is local." But there's also some black market hummus in here.
That's perfect.
If you don't know what black market hummus is, it's not for me to say. And yeah, and so thanks so much, Stergios. This is for you. Thanks.